How you all doing? Thanks for coming along tonight, and I'll just hand over to Eamon or Dan Feeney. We will never know who's going to get the proceedings underway.
Okay.
Eamon?
Thanks. I'm going to stand up for the only time tonight, just to say a few things, and it's pretty much thank yous. And first, thanks to Catherine for coming, and a special thank you for her to agreeing to do the interview tonight and the whole continuity of it. Am I still allowed to say the word continuity? So there's such a crowd, I'm beginning to think I must still owe people money. There's no other way that I turned up. So thanks, look, for turning up. I really appreciate it. It's great to see so many have come, and I hope you're enjoying the night so far, the food, the drink, the music, and the crack. And hopefully the next part will either introduce you to Get That Boy Home, or maybe reintroduce you if you've already read it. Thanks to Playhouse staff for hosting and facilitating this event. And the Derry Journal, the Ennish Times, and the Derry News for blitzing me on the paper this week in their newspaper. I have to thank Pat and Jerry, who've kind of agreed to do a few readings.
No.
As paid actors,
No.
as paid actors, they're not used to pro bono work, right? So if they don't smile when they're reading, you'll know why. If you'd asked me up to about 2 years ago, did I ever envisage that I would be standing in the Playhouse as an author to launch a book, then the answer would have been a simple no. Probably followed by, you off your head? In fact, the only public place that I ever expected to be standing for this long is the dock, as a defendant. But here I am tonight with this belated book launch of Get That Boy Home. For me, tonight's as very much as a celebration of the book as much as it is a book launch, given the book's been out for a few months. Many of you will probably have already read it, and a big thanks for that. So I'm not expecting to be knocked over in the sales rush later. Perhaps some of you might see my book as a potential Christmas present for a family member or a friend, and if that's the case, brilliant. This has been a feature of the last few months, where I tend to try and talk people out of buying it. Whatever talents I have as a writer, sales is definitely not my strong suit. Before I finish, there are a few people I need to thank that helped Get That Boy Home get out there. At the same time, I understand people don't like getting singled out in a public setting like this. But nevertheless, you're not on. I never sought sponsorship for the book, but these are a few names. Sarge, George, Alice, Carol, Marianne, and Paul all decided I would need it. They obviously knew me better than I knew myself. So thank you for your generosity. The turning point for me came when I stumbled on Marianne McNulty, who edited the book. I've always been a bit awkward on my feet, but this stumble was pure gold. With her help, expertise, and encouragement, I finally accepted that what I had written might actually be worth publishing. Getting the cover designed was a no-brainer, as our Michael is a brilliant artist, a truly hidden talent. So he did the cover sketch, and then next up was the graphic designer, Martina Doherty, who's also here tonight, who took Michael's sketch and turned it into the finished book cover, which I think is fantastic. Martina also designed my website, Derry Yarns, which apart from introducing Get That Boy Home, contains some poems and short stories I've written. She was busy as well. She also did the admin work and getting the book self-published on Amazon. That was after Jane Buckley had kindly shared her self-publishing journey with me and gave me a sense of what it was all about. This book lay dormant for about 8 years, with the pilot light kind of kept burning by friends and family who read the manuscript and offered continuous encouragement. You know who you are, so no litany of names is needed, just a heartfelt thank you. If I do any more thank yous, I'll be in danger of outdoing Barry McGuigan and Barney Eastwood in their heyday. So I think for now I'll just pass it over to Catherine McGinty to take us through the rest of the night.
Well, Eamon, I loved Get That Boy Home. I thought it was a very warm and a very authentic book. And it came from your daddy ringing your brother Hugh in London
The title.
and telling him to get you home because you had gone to London. So do you want to tell us a wee bit about your mommy and daddy and your relationship with them growing up? It seems a very warm relationship.
I mean, I suppose they give her a sort of a resume of your relationship with parents, you know, will be probably different over different ages. But as a child, certainly, you know, I have nothing but love for them. I loved them that much that I couldn't wait to get out of the house and go play up the banking, you know. But I've never ever felt anything other than, I didn't know what the definition of love was, but, you know, I was watered and fed and looked after and clothed and sent to school and got a few hammerings along the way. So very normal, a very normal childhood. I suppose as I got into teenage, you know, the relationship was different, you know, because, well, there's one teenager at least in the audience, and I remember when Emma, my daughter, was a teenager, it was her birthday was coming up, and I was looking for a birthday card, and I always tried to get something, you know, pertinent, and this jumped out at me, and it just says, ask a teenager while they still know it all. So that was me, you know. There was nothing I had to learn, you know, and of course there was everything I had to learn. So it was a different relationship as a teenager, and then of course my dad didn't stay around as long as my mum. He died when I was 18 after a number of years being sick, you know. But and my kind of, I had this thing about my dad. I loved the cinema, and anybody who's read the book will see how I used to escape there, or Dan Finney did anyway. You can't took me with him. And but you know, I loved the cinema, and I love films, and I still do. And for some reason, I always had my dad kind of and James Stewart matched up. You know, I thought they were facially alike, but they probably weren't. But in my head, they were, you know, cousins, if not twins. So I had a look up to him, and then there was that thing in our house as well, which there was 8 of us, and that's not counting mum and dad. So, you know, it was a busy time, I would say, for anybody trying to parent us, especially 6 boys who kind of shared delinquency in different in different measure. But you know, I remember if he wanted something from my daddy, we asked my mummy, you know, and it was a bit like that marriage feast of Cana thing, where, you know, Mary went to the son, somebody went to Mary. That's what it was. So you know how much of the Bible I've read this week. But anyway, so you know, look, I would say it was fairly normal, even if I wasn't. They did the best to introduce normality into my life.
So we're going to hear a wee extract now from Pat. You're going to do a wee bit of read us a wee bit of the book, Pat.
Oh, well.
Thank you.
This is a bit. Then it happened. The dreaded dog in the distance syndrome. About 100 yards away, a man and a dog approached. Dan had a deep fear of big dogs. How was he going to get past the oncoming mutt without getting eaten or crapping himself? A cold sweat started to form over the warm sweat that was already there. Dan didn't know the scientific impact of this concoction, but it certainly impacted his nerves. He dared not look in case it might draw the attention of the hound. There was no way out other than the river on his right, and even in his state of abject fear, he preferred a tetanus jab for a dog bite to swallowing some power walker shite from the river. The dog barked sharply. Oh, fuck, I'm dead, he thought. But as God had it, the white poodle passed by without mauling him. As Dan was heading back in the lane, he saw the Craigavon Bridge a few hundred yards away in the distance. The bridge indicated to him that he had 75% of the run completed. The bad news was that he had 25% to go, and his shins were hurting. He would have delved deeper into whether the glass was half full or half empty, only he had stopped drinking years ago, so this metaphor didn't apply. However, the mathematician in him had calculated that he would be home in 15 minutes. As he passed the street drinkers again at the Railway Museum, he was glad they had not yet been moved to the border, because he wanted to check house prices in Calais before the unification of Ireland. A feature of the running surface from his apartment all the way out the line was that the council had provided a cycle path. As he crossed the road at the bridge and was taking a corner, a cyclist nearly took him off his feet. Cyclists in Derry were very territorial and didn't like the fact that joggers often strayed onto their designated path. This guy was no different and grunted a few expletives from his fallen position. Dan looked down and immediately identified him as a taxi driver from a local firm. "When you fuckers stop blaring your horns at 3 a.m. and stop parking in the middle of the road, then I'll stop running on the cycle path," he said. At that, the cyclist got up, pointing to his cut knee. "You should have got a taxi because you can't ride that fucking bike," Dan taunted. The taxi driver got rather agitated, but Dan soon disappeared towards the Foyle embankment, comforting himself in the thought that taxi drivers might be next in the osmosis to Donegal, but hoping they didn't settle in Calais. Tiredness was kicking in, and Dan's breathing was sending out distress signals. The couple having the affair were 50 yards in front of him. When they saw him coming, they flagged him down. "I hope they're not trying to enlist me for a threesome, as I'm too knackered," he thought. "If they'd just asked me on the way out." Dan stopped to give them the bad news. The man produced a camera and in his broad Derry accent explained that they were married yesterday and were going on honeymoon later that day. He asked Dan to take a photo of them with the River Foyle as the backdrop. Dan was still in shock that a Derry man had used a local hotel for honourable and legitimate purposes. He took the camera and waited until the happy couple readied themselves. As he looked through the lens, he wondered, would the Foyle's raw sewage feature in this photo? Or would the council airbrush clean this photo too? The sewage deficiencies in the Foyle seemed to preoccupy Dan, and in an unsolicited Darwinian moment, he reckoned that if he ever wrote a book, he would call it The Origin of the Feces.
Thank you, Pat.
Nice.
There's a wee bit of foreshadowing there in that extract, Eamon. So he'd stopped drinking years ago, and you're looking about the reunification of Ireland. So would you tell us a wee bit about your writing process now that that's all?
That'll be probably a fairly short answer. I haven't got an awareness that I even have a process, but I'm working on it. Well, I think the process for me in this was, it was very much an emptying out. I'll put it this way: when I was working through titles for the book, and eventually I got to get that by home, the first one, which probably mightn't have been just too catchy in the sales side, was going to just call it A Good Vomit, because it seemed as if everything was coming out. But my process really was, it took me a few years to write a book that I probably should have been able to write in a few weeks. And that was mainly down to maybe how I perceive me as I couldn't have even called myself a writer, and I still shy away from words like writer and author. But I guess I have no choice now. I've written a book and I have to accept that I am a writer. Well, people can decide if I'm any good at it. But so that low esteem that I've always struggled with, really, the best way of putting it. I never really made the book that important. So I just, and when I found when I was writing this book, I didn't have to plan it. Once I got the first chapter written, which it was going to be a book of short stories, and the first chapter was the first short story, but I knew that cynical dairyman too well. I had to take him back and through his life, and maybe mirror some of the things that Dan Feeney did. He got me into a lot of trouble. That was kind of, that made it easy. I would think, I have plans maybe to write another book or two, but I will need a process then. I certainly will. I'll need to plan better. But for me, this was kind of more an outpouring of, I didn't want to write a book about the Troubles, but I wanted to write a book that took in the Troubles. I wanted to write a book that took in life during it. I wanted to write a book to show, that we weren't necessarily heroes or psychopaths, because you were painted as one or the other, that we were just ordinary people who saw what we believed to be injustice, and we give it a go trying to do something about it. And I don't know if that comes out in the book, but I tried to put that in there, and then you mentioned about, stopping drinking.
Mm-hmm.
That's another story maybe. I've been fortunate to not have drank now for almost 35 years, And I would just call myself a failed drinker without getting into any great, I used to joke that brought me out in spots. There were spots like Belfast, Cork, Dublin. So, there was good reason for me to stop drinking, and
Yeah.
I just happily get a daily reprieve at it still.
Yeah, yeah. So Pat, we're going to hear another extract from you about St. Columbus College.
All right.
This will be good.
I'm sure this will be very good.
Yeah.
Hope I don't get traumatized here.
You had the same teacher.
Yeah.
For the rest of his life, Dan found it poignant that his early experiences of discrimination came from within the bowels of the Catholic and nationalist community, who themselves were the victims of unionist one-party domination for so many years. Reflections such as this demonstrated the complexity of the troubles that began a few years later. At the age of 14, Dan recalled another pompous priest telling the class to get their parents to vote for a moderate unionist, an oxymoron of its time if ever there was one. The second experience that was to brand itself into Dan's consciousness for eternity was his 3 years learning maths with Mr. McMaher, otherwise known to the boys as the Hammer. The Hammer had it all. He was a thug with a tie, excelled in verbal degradation and enjoyed watching boys suffer, and of course was an upstanding Catholic within the community. He introduced Dan to valuable concepts such as the angles of isosceles and equilateral triangles, algebraic formulae, the total uselessness of being a working class dairyman, and how to degrade a boy and ensure the effects lasted for a lifetime. Dan didn't doubt his prowess as a mathematician, but knew from personal experience how he excelled at the latter two. The 3 years under Hammer's tutelage were memorable for all the wrong reasons, and even though he had a natural aptitude for figures, he struggled to learn by his degrade-as-you-go system. He recalled one day when Mr. McMaher was randomly asking questions on geometry while simultaneously throwing barbed comments to the students. He barked loudly at Dan, "What's an acute angle?" As Dan tried to determine whether it was over or under 90 degrees, the Hammer closed in, menacingly spitting insults about corner boys and lowlifes. Dan nervously gave the wrong answer. "It's over 90 degrees, sir," he uttered. Well, it was as if he had just made McMaher's day. The easy bit was 6 slaps and multiple thumps on the arm just below his right shoulder. That pain subsided over the next 2 periods, but his next little gem was to stay with Dan for a lifetime. "Feeney, for the rest of your life, if you ever have a choice to make between 2 possible outcomes, choose the one you don't think is right, because you will always choose the wrong option." This was esteem and confidence building at its best, Hammer style. Just the way to instill into a boy the enthusiasm and endeavour required for success. How McMaher was never awarded a Nobel Prize for his sterling contribution to youth education, Dan would never know. Dan relived and reviled that day hundreds of times over the years, especially any time he had a choice to make. On the plus side, he never forgot what an acute angle was, which no doubt would have vindicated the twisted logic of the Hammer. The conflict that this experience introduced into his life was akin to watching Mrs. Doyle of Father Ted's fame trying to give herself a cup of tea.
Thank you, Pat. I interviewed. I interviewed another fella last summer called Paul Cassidy, and he was also at St. Columbus College. He wrote a book called Getting Beethoven, and he also highlighted the brutality of the regime there, Eamon. So he had similar experiences to Dan Feeney. So what effect do you think that kind of brutality and classism had on Eamon and had on Dan?
Okay. Well, I don't want to, as I said, I don't want to start
No.
yelling. At the same time, look,
Aye.
in the era that I was educated, it was cruel, it was brutal, it was all those things, and I suffered from it. Now, I think I also have to add that there were, some people handle that differently. For me, basically, after situations like what happened in the passage that Pat read, by the age of 14, I basically had down tools. I had rebelled. There was something in me, I couldn't cope with it, and my answer was not to do I'll show you in the sense of going and excelling, but it was the other way to say I ducked out, and I basically, let's just say, in one of my term reports came in, the day's absence was 33 in one term, days absence, and that's, if that, that wouldn't even get happening today, because this whole education system it's wonderful in many ways, but that was my response to it. There were people who were maybe more resilient than me. They may have been smarter. I don't even think it came to the intelligence. It came to how you were able to cope with it, and I didn't. My view on the teachers there, there were some of them were okay, most of them weren't, but they all had something to impart. They weren't stupid men. In the college, it was all men, apart from one woman who taught elocution. You imagine taking elocution, yes. All I can remember is if you could choose, would you put crooners in a sound-insulated, secluded room? Who gives a fuck? Anyway, I don't know many crooners. I believe they were probably all very smart and intelligent people, and some people stuck at it and did really well. I just wasn't one of them. So from the age of 14 to 16 when I left, I had just down tools completely, and I got other interests.
So you're going to read us a wee extract now about one of those interests, Eamon?
Okay,
yes.
Right. Oh, aye.
Thank you.
Anybody that read the book will know that I had a very interesting first date. I better put on these reading glasses, and this is only a small part of it, Now, I'm not going to say too much other than that Fiona, who in the book, is here tonight. That's all I'm allowed to say. Anyway, this is a little passage, and I was asked to read this one for pretty obvious reasons, Fiona had sent word that she would meet him outside St. Colum's Hall the next afternoon at 3 p.m. Jesus, what am I going to do now? The sweaty palms, racing heart, and jangling nerves of his stalking days now paled into insignificance as Dan was overcome with a tsunami of fear and trepidation, mixed with a cocktail of excitement and adrenaline. He wondered why at times like this, his bowels and kidneys seemed to come under pressure. On reflection, he reckoned that God had a great sense of humour to use the same body parts for sexual arousal and waste disposal. That night was one Dan never forgot. His mind ping-ponged between, what will I say to her tomorrow? And she's not going to turn up. Both thoughts bringing no peace to his tortured emotions. In the final analysis on a sleepless night, he settled for her not turning up as preferable to him having to actually talk to her. He would have awakened early the next morning had it not been for the fact that at no stage did he sleep. He eventually crawled out of bed to begin preparation for the big date. After taking a bath on 3 occasions that morning, he decided to have his first ever shave. A few minutes into it, it became apparent a strong breeze would have sufficiently removed the face fluff. But Dan thought a cleanly shaven face would convince Fiona she was going out with a real man. Where the fuck are the Christian Brothers when you need them? What will I wear? His mother disapproved of jeans, and the only other long trousers he had were his black school ones. However, he did have a pair of brown corduroy trousers that he bought with his Christmas money, so they got the vote, along with a yellow T-shirt. Just before he left the house, he paid one last visit to the bathroom. The nervous sweat that was now flowing freely down his chest and back nullified the 3 baths he had taken earlier. She'll think I'm a minger. At that, he emptied almost half a bottle of his brother's Brut aftershave onto his hands, and applied it generously to his face and neck. A feeling of excruciating pain ensued as the brute connected with the shaving lacerations on his face and neck. Dan learned a lesson that day on how not to and when not to shave. This was followed by several blasts of Old Spice deodorant under each arm. He held it that close and squirted it that often that the deodorant formed a white scum under each armpit. Not to worry, it's hardly likely I'll have my oxters inspected on a first date. Dan set off to meet Fiona, looking like a shiny new pin and smelling like a whore at a hockey match, due to the chemical reaction of the toiletries and the relentless flow of perspiration. By the time he reached St. Colum's Hall, his bowels and kidneys were also talking back to him. So as you would expect, all was not well with Dan Feeney on his first proper date. He still hadn't worked out what to say to Fiona if she turned up. The 54-year-old Dan's advice to his teenage self would probably have been to be himself and act normal. But that would have translated to young Dan as wetting and shitting himself, having a failure of his vocal cords, and awkwardly falling down the steps of St. Colum's Hall.
Thank you, Eamon. One wee quote that I loved from the book was you said the women of Ireland were towers of strength to the young OTRs. Tell us a wee bit about the role of maybe some of the women in Dan's life, Eamon.
Well, we have to be out for 10:30. So we'll keep it brief. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that I think sometimes, as someone who came through the Troubles, an ex-internee who I don't make any bones about that. I was an active Republican. Some of the people who were active along with me might suggest I wasn't. But that's a matter for them. But anyway, and sometimes, I think the women kind of got overlooked a wee bit. Maybe not so much now, especially stagers like us, we wouldn't let that happen. But, I think about, there was times where we needed some food or we needed a place to stay, or we needed just an open door. Because if somebody was looking for you, if you didn't want to get to you, you always had to get somewhere to go. And it was generally always women who facilitated that. Also look at, the number of women who did jail time and died in the Troubles, so it was not a man thing at all. Whatever people may think of the struggle, and everybody can make up their own mind about it, but those that participated, in my view, were idealistic and courageous people who saw something was wrong and chose a particular path to go. That's not to say other people can't see it differently, of course they can. But, I think about the woman Jerry is going to be reading about Mrs. Logue, and there's a story there, and I won't spoil that reading, but, she just typified, what the Derry woman did to help us young fellas, maybe to keep us out of well, not keep us out of danger, because that was impossible, but just to keep us away from those who wanted us.
There is a wee bit of gallows humour in the book. So that's apparent in Jerry's the piece that Jerry's going to read next. But would you say that's a Derry or a personal or a northern coping mechanism, that sort of dark humour?
I suppose answers I wouldn't really know. I can only talk about maybe me. I can actually remember back when I was about 9 or 10, I always had a sort of inferior kind of complexion about myself. And I kind of remember developing a sense of humour. I don't know whether I thought I would do it or it just happened. But I know that sometimes people laughed. And I like that because, when you're feeling that you're back of the bus material and, if somebody actually likes what you're doing or saying, it's nice. So for me, the humour, and it probably has just got worse over the years rather than better, as you can see in the book, but I don't know whether it's anything to do with esteem or whether it's to do with Derry, but I think it is an Irish thing, all right, and maybe that's part of our problem as well, that many of us anyway, live in a way where we were put down by people, whether they be governments or schools or clergymen or whatever, and sometimes we just had to laugh about it to learn to live with it, rather than maybe stand up against it.
Mm-hmm. So we're going to hear an extract from you now, Jerry, the Provo 5 kg couch.
Indeed. They had hardly set foot back in the Brandywell area when the Brits swooped and saturated the area with troops. The two provosts went in different directions, each trying to evaporate into the safety of an open house before the soldiers scooped them. Dan's comrade did just that, and Dan thought that he had too, entering a house in Southend Park that ran adjacent to the football ground. He knew the soldiers were in hot pursuit, but hadn't accounted for the fact that they saw him enter the house. He bolted into the living room and vaulted onto the sofa to blend in with the rest of the family who were watching TV. They looked shocked, but they knew the score when an on-the-run provost arrived in such a hurry. Within seconds, Dan heard a commotion in the hallway as Mrs. Logue put her large frame in the way of the marauding Brits, giving him a few precious seconds to make his escape out the back door and into the mews lane that ran along the east wall of the football ground. Dan burst out the back door and into the yard. His heart was pounding, his hands were sweating and shaking, and he fumbled at the bolt to open the yard door. He looked out onto the laneway, but his escape was thwarted, as the lane was by now being flooded by soldiers. Quickly, he returned to the yard. By this time, the other soldiers had seen off the attentions of Mrs. Logue and were at the rear door about to enter the yard. In an instant, he scrambled up the wall and jumped down into the yard next door. Intellectually, Dan believed that the game was up, but as before, the instincts of survival didn't read those type of books. The Brits were, as usual, offering words of advice such as, "Stop, you fucking Irish bastard! Put your hands in the air, you provost scum!" So Dan knew the Geneva Convention was on hold. Once in the next yard, Dan tried to enter that house, but the back door was locked. As he was trying to climb over the adjoining wall to get to the next house, the back door from the lane was kicked in, and the Brits swarmed into the small yard. The game seemed finally up this time. The Brits introduced themselves in their time-honoured fashion by dragging Dan into the laneway in a frenzy of noisy and triumphant squatty euphoria. They had got their man. That fucking trendy orange jumper had betrayed him. From then on, he vowed to pick his own clothes if he survived the next 10 minutes. He was pushed down on his belly like a fallen crucifix. The soldiers above them kicked continuously at his body and stamped on his hands, no doubt part of their victory dance. The earlier bravery of his instincts for freedom had dissipated, and Dan lay sprawled on the ground, once again acutely aware of what fear really was at that moment in his life. Even youthful courage and exuberance lost their potency in times like that. "We got the fucker, Sarge," he heard one soldier report. "What we did with the provo bastard?" At that moment, Dan expected to feel the muzzle of an SLR at his temple and to be spirited away to wherever dead provosts go. Strangely, there was peace in that thought, and for a second he felt no fear. That second was to prove crucial. "Bring him round to the troop carrier," said the sergeant. "This other one's going to entertain us back at the barracks." Dan was manhandled to his feet, and his right arm was reversed and screwed up his back, secured by the cord of the soldier's baton, which the holder took great pleasure in tightening on his wrist, perhaps to see if Dan could wave at himself from behind his own back. Aesthetically, it probably didn't look too good, but he would have secured the part of Christy Brown had there been an audition for the role. Dan was frog-marched down the lane to the waiting troop carrier at the foot of Southend Park. A crowd of women had come out of their houses protesting to the army to let the young man go. Mrs. Logue was among them. The women of Derry were tower of strength in those days to young OTRs like Dan. Republican history should have afforded them a greater place than it has up to now. Flanked by half a dozen Brits and guided from behind by his baton-holding puppet master, Dan knew there was no hope. His mind had now turned to the torture and interrogation that lay ahead. Fear had returned, and with it came that active and instinctive mind that knew only of survival. He felt the cord of the baton loosen slightly as his captor sidled him towards the open back of the armoured car. In that instant, something happened that he thought was confined to the movies of his childhood. All of a sudden, Dan jerked his right arm down his back and simultaneously freed his hand from the soldier's baton cord and pushed him aside. Then came that 60-yard dash that he'd prepared for all those years earlier inside the very stadium that he was now being arrested outside. This time, the prize was not a book without pictures, nor was there a need for accolades or acknowledgement from anyone. Matters of esteem were completely superseded by thoughts of freedom and survival.
Thank you, Jerry. Tell us a wee bit about that comradeship in Long Kesh, Eamon, beyond. Because Dan and Sean especially, hilariously poignant.
Okay. Sean's here tonight. My other date. But I hope anybody who hasn't read the book will probably wonder what that was about. But anyway, Jerry will tell you when he does the next reading. But look, you know, I suppose to say that the comradeship started in Long Kesh is probably not. It needs to go a step before that. I think the comradeship started, you know, as we were together and around the Brandywell or the Bogside or wherever we were active. And there's something in that, you know. And of course, you know, Sean and I were arrested together and we bunked together. And you know, I was in Cage 7 and there was a lot of Derry people there and obviously a lot of Belfast people too. But there was just a bond, and I suppose it's a lot easier to even feel it now as I'm older and looking back on it. But there was always something there that you always had somebody's back, and you always were, you know, looking out for them. Equally, you know, the gallows humour you were talking about, you know, that was totally merciless, you know. So it was kind of love in a very, very twisted sort of way, I think, you know. But you know, I just treasure and love the fact that I made friends during the Troubles. And, you know, quite a number of them are here tonight, and I'm so delighted that they came, you know. We've been to a few places over the years. You know, we've been to, as you can imagine, that great Republican band, the Rolling Stones. we went to see them a few years ago, a few of us, and, you know, we've been to concerts and plays and stuff, and it's just a lovely thing in my life that those people are there, you know, because there's something more than just friendship there. It's spiritual, it's instinctive, and I better say no more of the waterworks.
So we're going to hear a wee extract from you, Jerry, about Long Kesh.
Long Kesh, indeed. In the midst of the frenzy of intense political activity inside and outside of the Kesh, there was always a spirit and sense of humour within the cages. Each new internee presented an opportunity for a laugh, and many of them suffered the same fate as Billy. Dan recalled two comrades from Derry being tasked with filling the water tower with buckets of water that they drew from the taps in the washroom, totally oblivious to the fact that the tower was plumbed in. The rest of the men had a good chuckle as the unsuspecting pair slogged their buckets up and down the tower for more than 2 hours, the sweat dripping off them on a hot sunny day. Another murder was given a few coins and sent to the cage gate to order 12 baps from the screws. Needless to say, the Kesh Bakery didn't do baps. There were many more dirty Joes played on the unsuspecting and innocent behind the wire. But perhaps the most famous was the one involving Dan and Sean. One day after visits, Sean remarked to Toodler, a fellow traveller from the New Lodge Road, that he had seen his girlfriend and she was fucking gorgeous. Dan heard the comment. So later that day, he sidelined Toodler, and between them they hatched a plan. That night, Toodler informed Sean that his girlfriend Mary had an identical twin sister. And if Sean wanted to, he would put a word in, and perhaps she might consent to him writing to her. Sean was absolutely delighted and asked Toodler to do his best. He was a handsome fucker, loved women, and was never short of female attraction. He was famous on the outside for 2-hour stunts in the bathroom as he groomed himself for a Friday night wooing session in Borderland. He was extremely easygoing, and Dan was totally relying on that quality coming to the fore when the shit was to eventually hit the fan. And so the dance commenced, with an initial letter from Sean to Julie, Mary's twin, introducing himself and requesting that she write to him during his time in Long Kesh. Toodler promised to smuggle the letter out during his next visit, and if she wrote back, he would do the same and smuggle Julie's letter in. It was perfect, and Sean was hooked from the get-go. And so the letters went back and forth over the next 2 months, each one from Sean incrementally more romantic than his predecessor, as he took the bait from Julie with alarming innocence and unawareness. He often confided in Dan about how this girl was really into him, totally oblivious that Dan was Julie and was the one answering the letters. He had even modified his handwriting to resemble the pettiness of the hand you would expect of a girl. Sean was also totally unaware that life in his hut in Cage 7 came to a standstill on letter days, as each letter was passed around the hut. Even Mickey, on 9th of August 1971 in Tierney, he was badly tortured by the Brits and whose daily mission was to scrutinise the Irish news for clues to the end of internment. He was given Sean's letter priority. He was given Sean's letter priority over the newspaper. The fact that the letters were supposedly being smuggled and therefore not subject to scrutiny by the screws gave Sean the confidence to be open with Julie. And as each letter came back, he was more buoyant about his budding love affair. Dan bunked above him and recalled him often reading his letters and engaging him with comments such as, "Jesus, Feeney, your woman's mad about me." Dan didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or shite himself. He reckoned when Sean found out, the latter would be automatically happening first. After about 8 weeks and a build-up of correspondence, the time came when the truth had to be told. Sean had invited Julie to come up and visit him, and of course, Dan accepted on her behalf. Sean was hyper in his laid-back sort of way, but Dan wasn't feeling so easygoing. It was a Sunday night. He was lying in his bunk, surrounded by all of Julie's letters. Dan passed the word round the hut for everyone to gather at Sean's bed. But by now, he felt as much guilt as he did devilment, but the mission had to be completed. Even by long cash standards, this was a dirty Joe to top them all. So as everyone angled around the bed, Dan went to his locker and took the pile of letters that Sean had written to Julie, threw them over Sean's bed and said, "Do you want to read these too, Sean?" The hut erupted with howls of laughter and shouts of derision. Sean was gutted, probably more by the fact that his love affair had ended than by the slagging from the internees. Dan waited, expecting a backlash, and resolved that if Sean hit him, he would take it as fair in the circumstances and wouldn't defend himself. But Sean just looked up and said, "You bastard, Feeney. I hadn't a clue. Fair play to you." And it all ended in laughter, which epitomised Sean's temperament and sense of humour. It was a privilege doing time with a man like that. By morning, it was all over, and they'd all got on with another day in hell.
You're a
I
bad
think I
one.
have more to fear from Sean than the rest.
You're a bad one, Eamon. The novel also has darker and more painful elements, Eamon. So you confronted these head on.
Okay, you're probably talking about addiction. And
Yeah,
things.
yeah. What,
Well,
do you want
I'm-
to tell us a wee bit about that?
I'm an ex-drinker and an ex-gambler, and I think I'm extremely lucky to be able to put the word ex in front of those two things. And like I said earlier, I didn't want to just tell a book about the troubles. I wanted to talk about people and how their lives were affected. I don't suggest for 1 minute that the troubles created, the fact that I was a failed drinker and a failed gambler. But that's just the way it was. But I thought it was important to kind of tell that story for a whole lot of reasons, but particularly to kind of make the book as authentic as it could, because, I often say, and you interviewed me a while back for the Ennis Times, I said, the book's probably about 80% fact. I don't say whose facts it is, but, and I don't say what's part of the 80%. Answers on a postcard. But, all I'm saying is if the book is anything, it's fairly accurate in many things, you know, and particularly in things that I failed at, you know, like drinking and gambling. And I particularly wanted to deal with that, one of those particular addictive things, in a way towards the end of the book. And there probably are people who haven't read it, so I'm not going to give any spoilers on it. All I'm to say is I just wanted to shine a light, you know, on the nature of gambling, particularly because in some ways it's a lesser light. You know, so many people know about drink; it's more visible. You know, when you're drunk, etc. But in my life, gambling was a very secret illness and a very damaging one as well. You know, and I wanted to, and I think I did through the book. I kind of expressed it. So it was about authenticity, but it was also to give a voice to something that I feel strongly about, and that I feel so fortunate, you know, to have in my rearview mirror today, and you know.
So what is the future? What does the future hold now for you, Eamon, in terms of literary projects? Have you anything in mind?
Well, the immediate future will probably get beat up by Sean.
Or Fiona?
She'll be cheerleading. But the future, well, I suppose the immediate future is there'll be books on sale when you're leaving. But don't feel you have to buy them. But no,
You do.
Listen, you know, if you think they make a present for somebody, great. And look, it's not that. This tonight is really, that's the least of my thoughts. You know.
Yeah.
People are here, and I'm just so glad they turned up, and I take that as an absolute honour. The rest doesn't matter. But I have two books. One I have started, and another is germinating in my head, which, along with the dandruff, has given me a lot of trouble. But and I also have a play written, which I just have a bit of finishing to do. And interestingly, I was talking to Kieran Griffiths today from in here, and I was telling him he had listened to it just before lockdown, and we had a few actors, two of them here tonight. So you have them here tonight, Emma, my daughter. So we had a few people doing readings of it, and I was telling him that I had made a start to modifying it, and I said, you know, maybe I'll send it to you, and you might want to see if it's something you're interested in. He says, when you finish it, he says, just get the actors together and we'll do another read through. So that was a nice feeling, you know. And fair play to Kieran. He just came down to sort of, you know, to say well done today.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
There he is, landed with a play to listen to.
Yeah.
But so the play is called Tortured Soul, and it's based in a treatment centre. And when Jerry and me talked one day about me writing a play, I rang him one Sunday with one of those eureka moments, and I said, you know, because we were just talking about most plays start where you're in a bar, you're in somewhere, you know, and I said to him, look, I found a place to put 4 people, and when people are at their most vulnerable, so it's in the treatment centre. And in some kind of wishful thinking, I thought, you know, it could be like Derry's version of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. So, you know, of course it'll not be anything close to that, but that's, you know, there's humour and there's darkness, and which there is in my book as well.
Yeah.
So I guess that's about me. And the other 2 books, once I get over this over tonight, I do intend to forget about selling books. As you can see, I'm absolutely useless at it, and just get on with, you know, writing. That's the easy part. The hard part's trying to actually sell them. I hate it. And I'm saying that, you know, they are selling themselves. Like there's several hundred sold, and I'm just amazed at that. You know, that anybody would want to take their time out and read the shite I write, but they're doing it, and they seem to be enjoying it. So that's just wonderful.
We're going to throw it open to the floor now. Is there
no.
Is there any?
It's Fiona and Sean here.
You haven't seen each other.
I guess he throws them. I'm not.
Is there anybody who wants to ask Eamon a question about anything?
Oh, thanks. Keep it
No,
narrow.
about the book. Is there anybody who's got any questions? Or do you just want to have another wee cup
Nobody
of tea or a
seems to
wee
be
glass
interested.
of wine? That's okay. Well then, just thank Pat and Jerry. Eamon, thank yous for coming. Stand up, Jerry. Stand up.
Oh my gosh.
Well done. Well done.
That's not fair.
Ah, well done.
Well, look,
Ah, well.
okay, he's obviously meant that.
We
Thanks
did.
very much. Look, I just wanted to say a thank you to you all again for coming. You know, this is a very special night for me in a whole lot of ways, you know, and one of the most special parts of it sits in just in the row there where there's Emma and Owen and Davin. Unfortunately, wee Penny couldn't be here. When Catherine was talking about women in my life and all that, you know, I was just thinking about that after I had spoken. And these days, you know, I have particularly two women in my life, you know. One's sitting there and she's the apple of my eye, and the other's 2.5 years old, Penny. And I'm more than happy that that's the number it stays at. And, you know, that's my, in many ways, my raison d'etre. You know, not forgetting Davin, who's not a woman. He's the best guy around, and I just love him to death. So, I just want to thank everybody for coming. I want to thank you for doing this, and I want to thank the people I've thanked before, but I won't do that and bore the shite out of these anymore. I don't know what's left, food and drink, but I imagine there's loads. We don't have to be out of here for maybe 10 or half 10. So please, we'll be getting the music turned back on. This is my playlist that I, with the odd one on something about her granny's bin lid or something thrown in. But, you know, please stay around, listen to the music, have a drink, have something to eat. That's what this is about too. It's about, you know, just having a bit of crack together. And so you may meet somebody who you have never met before, and sure, that could be another friend. So thanks very much, everybody, for coming.
Thank you, Emma. Well done.